Eddie, what stood out for you from this kind of wide-ranging conversation between John Mickle, the editor-in-chief of Bloomberg, of course, and Elon Musk?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one key thing for me was that we finally got some sort of idea of the layoffs coming at Tesla. I think, but I think he talked about 10% of the salaried workforce being laid off, and talking about how the company had grown really, really quickly, and how that forced them into a situation where they had to go into some layoffs now. Now, I think that's understandable, but I think what's even more notable from all of this is that, he is the creator of one of the most influential car companies of all time. And what we talk to him about first is Twitter, right? And what we end up with talking to him about is things like Dogecoin. I think there's a risk for investors from someone like Elon Musk that he is distracted. And I think, the whole Twitter thing is becoming a major distraction for Elon Musk. And I think that showed today.
Interesting, Eddie. Yeah, the distraction risk for Elon Musk, as you say, wearing a number of hats, whether it's the Boring Company or SpaceX or Tesla, and his commitment, he was saying, to Dogecoin. Interesting that the world's richest man is saying that he's committed to Dogecoin because he's trying to support those much further down the food chain. M-Line's Eddie van der Walt then on his views around that interview with Elon Musk. And of course, we will replay portions of that interview in the hours ahead. Coming up, Madame Lagarde, Christine Lagarde, warns of a severe risk of an abrupt fall in asset prices. We will talk about Madame Lagarde and that discussion with the European Parliament. Of course, she recommitted to rate hikes in July and September. Let's get Eddie back to talk about what is happening in these markets. There's some relief, and you saw that reflected across European equities yesterday. The US markets, of course, were closed. Now you're seeing gains broadly across the benchmark European stocks 600 of around 0.8%. Eddie, what do you make of the moves we've seen in this market? Have we hit a bottom at this point?
You know what? That's a really good question. I think there are two risks to pricing a bottom in this market and assuming that we are there already. Of course, today's a very, very green numbers across the screen. It builds a little bit of optimism. But I think that the risks are that, central banks come back even more aggressive than they are now. And I think, that could put more of a dampener on stocks. And the second is that no stock market really has priced a recession, whether in Europe or whether in the US, just yet. And I think those are the major two risks, that either of those two things are not fully priced yet. So while we may have hit a short-term bottom, I think there's probably a little bit more volatility ahead of us.
More volatility ahead. Eddie van der Walt from our MLive team, thank you for breaking down some of the key market themes, of course, reacting to that interview with Elon Musk. Joining me now is Gareth McCartney, head of EMEA Equity Capital Markets at UBS. And Gareth, what a turnaround in terms of the capital market sentiment from 12 months ago. What is your sense of how the second half of this year plays out for the capital markets, given the higher rates environment and the concerns about inflation and indeed recession risks?
Great, thank you. Look, I think you touched on the key point. We've had a liquidity-driven rally for the last number of years. That led to very low volatility and elevated levels of issuance from a capital markets perspective. The real answer to your question is it's very much wait and see. Over the summer, I think the precondition for a healthy second half of the year will be driven by the VIX index, which in turn is driven by the view on interest rates. So we really need to see the VIX back at or below 20 for a sustainable period of time to allow us to execute what is actually quite a healthy pipeline for the second half of the year.
OK, we want to unpack that. But before we get to that point, what do you see currently as the biggest tail risk then in the second half of this year, Gareth?
I think it remains interest rates and central bank activity. We're in a tussle at the moment in the market where equity investors are really trying to determine the path of interest rates. Once they have more clarity on that, we will have a lower volatility environment and in turn, a better environment for equity issuance.
OK, talk to us about the IPO pipeline then. You said there are companies waiting in the wings. They want to list, but they want to wait for the VIX and the volatility to come down, maybe around the 20 level. It's currently around 30. Just unpack for us what is happening in terms of that IPO pipeline.
Yeah, I think we're seeing investors remain engaged, but more selective. The pipeline itself has broadened out. We've been in a pure tech and growth-driven environment for a number of years now. And if I look at what we have now, it's representing different sectors. So it's healthcare, it's industrials, it's financials. And really what we're seeing is a reflection of a secondary market that's moved from growth into value. And as I look now forward at the IPO pipeline, that's reflecting that. And we're seeing different companies in different sectors represented.
And what is the extent, we've already seen this, the discounting that we've seen for those companies that have listed publicly or indeed raised capital with rights issues? Where are we in the discounting process here?
It's difficult, given the low volumes, to have a very clear view on that. So I'd say we're in a very bespoke environment. We've seen elevated activity in the Middle East, reflecting the macro backdrop, and that's where most of the IPOs in the first half have happened. But more positively, I would also say investors for existing companies looking to raise equity for M&A or for other growth purposes are getting a good audience for that. And so for that type of activity, we are still seeing investors engaged, and we are still seeing the market being open for that.
OK, we have one example of that today, which is Ocado raising at £575 million. Gareth McCartney, head of EMEA Equity Capital Markets at UBS. Thank you for those insights. Looking at the VIX when it comes to when those IPOs come back and whether the second half is looking more opportune and a shift from growth to value within capital raising. Thank you. OK, coming up, the UK braces for the biggest rail strike in 3 decades after talks come to a grinding halt. More on that story and the impact next. This is Bloomberg.
呢，为开春的时候，为各国运动员和随队官员提供热情周到的服务。
Lots happening on Wall Street.
It's the basic law of economics.
It validated what the market was already pricing.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insights.
David, you just hit the nail right on the head.
From businesses most influential and instrumental.
And that's the way you run good risk management.
It's a challenging dynamic.
We could continue to see that kind of strength.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week premieres Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Mercedes-Benz is on a path towards CO2 neutral mobility. So we have flicked the switch there, and really we're going to step by step electrify everything. And what does that mean? Combustion engines get electrified.
Welcome back to the Open. We are 24 minutes into your European trading day. Some decent optimism, currently gaining 0.8% across the European benchmark. US futures pointed gains of around 1.5%. Now, this week the UK will experience the biggest rail strike in 3 decades after last-ditch talks failed. The walkout by 40,000 workers has been branded total misery by the government. Let's get more then with Bloomberg's Laura Wright. Laura, what is the update so far this morning?
We're going to see strikes Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday on the National Rail Network. To make matters worse, London Tube will be on strike today as well. The cost of living crisis is the primary reason behind the walkouts. I have a chart which illustrates pressure on wages. Average wages for the month of April down 3.5% year over year. And in reality, the situation on the ground is even worse because this doesn't take into consideration lagged effects of hikes from the Bank of England and the increase in national insurance contributions, which happened back in April.
And what's the expected economic cost, Laura, of all of this?
The economic cost, according to the Centre for Economics and Business Research, will be around £91 million. They see that as the hit to the UK economy of lost output and believe that growth will be hit by 0.1% in the second quarter, contributing to a technical recession in Q2 and Q3. It's worth noting their forecast differs from what the Bank of England and city economists see as collated by Bloomberg, but revisions might need to be made to this chart if we see further mass walkouts taking place across public sector industries such as teaching, civil servants, NHS workers, and the General Secretary of the RMT has even called for a nationwide strike, Tom, the last time we saw a strike of that scale back in 1926.
Potentially a summer of misery. £100 million hit, as you say, Bloomberg's Laura Wright on that rail chaos hitting the UK this morning. Coming up, VinFast CEO Le Thi Tu Thuy at the Qatar Economic Forum on her plans for the EV market. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
It's almost the end of the year, but Bali is still quiet and empty. I am here in Kuta Legian, one of the main walking streets here that is used to be a tourist spot for beach, dinings, shopping, but many shops here are still closed. Most of the outlets are either for rent or for sale as they have run out of business.
Saya kerjanya di sini udah lama, udah ada 10 tahunan di sini kerja. Masih sepi sih, nggak kayak dulu. Kalau dulu kan rame, sekarang ya ada 1-2 itu ada, tapi nggak kayak dulu. Kalau dulu rame sekali, sekarang paling dapat jualan ya 100, 120 gitu, 200 ya. Kalau dulu sih ya nyampe dah 1 juta, 1,5 itu nyampe dapat jualan. Bisa sampai 2 juta dulu. Sekarang nggak pernah lagi dapat segitu, sama aja. Belum ada turis ke Bali, masih ya domestik aja.
While Bali has reopened its borders for foreign tourists since October, they're still not coming in. Many international airlines are yet to reinstate their direct flight to the island. Balinese people here really hope they can see more people from Australia, China, and Europe to come visit next year.
BSO Now is your online home for weekly Boston Symphony Orchestra and Boston Pops performances. See new concerts that go behind the scenes, plus acclaimed archival concerts. Visit bso.org/now, where the music plays on. BSO season sponsor, Bank of America.
I think that it's hard to put your head around any narrative. Let's just be honest. We've had sort of a shift in, are we in some sort of stagflation fears moment? People were talking about that all day yesterday.
Welcome back to The Open. We are 30 minutes into your European trading day, and here are your top stories. Elon Musk says he thinks a recession in the near term is more likely than not. Speaking to Bloomberg earlier this hour, the Tesla and SpaceX CEO also said he wants 80% of North America and half the world on Twitter. President Biden says a US recession is entirely avoidable. Despite dire warnings from Goldman Sachs, ECB President Madame Lagarde restates plans for consecutive rate rises. Stock futures and treasury yields rise. Plus, rail workers go on strike. UK commuters brace for the largest rail walkout in 3 decades as the nation's trains grind to a screeching halt. Let's check in on those markets then. You're seeing pretty decent gains across the European space of around 0.9%, building on the modest optimism that filtered through those equity markets here in Europe yesterday. Of course, it was a national holiday stateside. Here's how things are breaking down then. 0.9% gains across the benchmark, almost 1% gain for the DAX, 130 points built on top of the DAX. The FTSE 100 faring slightly less well compared to some of its European counterparts, gaining 0.4%. And we can switch on and see how things are breaking down sector by sector. We talked about those recession risks. President Biden saying that a recession is avoidable. We heard, of course, from Elon Musk and his views on the likelihood of a recession. And then Goldman Sachs raising their likelihood now to 30% in terms of the chances of a recession over the next year versus 15% previously. JP Morgan, meanwhile, saying that the equity situation could ease in the second half of the year. So that debate still, of course, fast and furious around the likelihood of a recession. Meanwhile, over at the ECB, Madame Lagarde giving testimony to Parliament and reiterating that July and September are certainly live in terms of those rate increases, but also signalling that market tensions are not going to derail those plans, and focused more on the question of wages and starting to see a bit of wage price increase across the Eurozone. So in terms of the sectors, you're seeing gains pronounced across chemicals, consumer basic resources, 2 sectors in the red as things stand, personal consumption and utilities down 0.4%. Let's get back then to that interview with Elon Musk, the CEO, of course, of SpaceX and Tesla. A wide-ranging conversation on everything from US politics to Twitter and China's competition in the EV space. Here are some of the highlights.
With respect to the Twitter transaction, there's a limit to what I can say publicly, given that it is somewhat of a sensitive matter. So I will have to be measured in my responses here, such as not to generate incremental lawsuits.
That seems to be a risk you sometimes manage to overcome.
Yes, a deposition minimization is, I think, important.
Have Twitter given you enough information?
Well, there are still a few unresolved matters. You've probably read about the question as to whether the number of fake and spam users on the system is less than 5%, as Twitter claims, which I think is probably not most people's experience when using Twitter. So we're still awaiting resolution on that matter, and that is a very significant matter. We're awaiting resolution on that. And then, of course, there is the question of will the debt portion of the round come together, and then will the shareholders vote in favor? So I think those are the 3 things that stand in the, that need to be resolved before the transaction can complete.
What about the general state of the economy? Does that weigh on you when you think about this? I mean, you just described it. You have a super bad feeling about the economy. Are you still in that position? I just said to you earlier, Joe Biden has just come out and said that a recession in America is not inevitable. How do you feel about the economy?
Well, I think a recession is inevitable at some point. As to whether there is a recession in the near term, I think that is more likely than not. It certainly isn't. It's not a certainty, but it appears more likely than not. And what do you think?
I'm with you. I agree with you. I think it's more likely. Can I ask you one particular thing to do with the Twitter bid, which is, you are one of the biggest and fastest growing investors in China. Tesla, you've talked about it being a third of your sales going forward. You're now buying Twitter, the kind of public forum for free speech. The Chinese historically don't tend to be very enthusiastic about free speech. Are you worried about whether you can keep those two particular horses running? Is buying Twitter going to get you in trouble with the Chinese?
Well, Twitter does not operate in China. Yes. So, and I think China does not attempt to interfere with the free speech of the press in the U.S. As far as I know, because I assume you're not under pressure at Bloomberg from China. So I think there's I don't think this is going to be an issue.
And in terms generally of that issue of freedom of speech and Twitter, you've talked about Twitter making it even freer and letting more people onto it. Is there a limit at all to who you think should be allowed onto Twitter?
Well, my aspiration for Twitter, or in general for the digital town square, would be that it is as inclusive, in the broader sense of the word, as possible. That it is an appealing system to use. So, I mean, ideally, I'd like to get like 80% of, let's say, North America, and perhaps, I don't know, half the world or something, ultimately on Twitter in one form or another. And that means it must be something that is appealing to people. It obviously cannot be a place where they feel uncomfortable or harassed, or they'll simply not use it.
Okay. The CEO of Tesla, of course, Elon Musk, speaking to Bloomberg News editor-in-chief John Micklethwaite at the Qatar Economic Forum just a short time ago. And of course, Tesla is not the only challenger to the automotive sector. Vietnam's VinFast is the first car maker from emerging markets to expand into global markets with its range of electric cars and electric scooters. For more, let's go to Bloomberg's Haslinda Armin at the Qatar Economic Forum in Doha. Haslinda.
Well, Tom, this is one company that is investing billions of dollars in an EV plant in North Carolina, prompting President Biden to say, you know what, it's going to create 7,000 jobs. Let's get insights, perspective from VinFast CEO Lati Tutui. Tui, good to have you with us. I mean, is the plan on track? We know that you've said before that production will start in 2024. But of course, the world is a different world today. Is your plan on track?
Yes, we are still on track to start the production in July 2024. We are in the process of getting construction permit, and we expect to break the ground by the end of the summer, maybe like September or so.
So you've not been derailed in any way at all by supply chain disruptions, by expectations of a slowdown in the global economy?
We haven't slowed down. Yeah, every time there's challenges, I think it's better for us. So.
Of course, there are also plans to produce about 700,000 to 1 million EVs in the U.S. in 5 to 6 years. Some say that's very ambitious. You say?
I think it's achievable. Not in the U.S., but globally, between our plants in Vietnam and in the U.S. But we think that it's achievable.
What's driving that optimism?
I think the demand for EVs is increasing. I think Bloomberg New Economic Forum in November almost doubled the forecast for plug-in passenger cars to 26 million by 2025 instead of 14 million the year before that. So there's a demand. We see it every day in all the sector, either not only passenger car but also electric buses or e-scooter. So we get inbound inquiries from all over the world. So I think there's a high demand for electric vehicles.
Of course, the plan is to be a global player. You want to sell EVs to countries including Germany. What are some of the challenges in becoming a global EV player?
There are many challenges. Obviously, first of all, VinFast is still a no-name brand, so we need people need to get to know about VinFast first. There are challenges about battery technologies and global market challenges as a whole. but we also see a lot of opportunities in this market. I mean, EV, moving to EV is an inevitable trend, and we are in the forefront of the movement, and we need to take advantage of the opportunity. So I think we have many advantages that can allow us to make it happen.
Of course, we've just spoken to Elon Musk here at the Qatar Economic Forum. I'm just wondering, how does VinFast think it can compete with the likes of Tesla? What is the strategy?
We never started out trying to compete with the EV companies. I mean, our strategy is very different. We want to compete and replace the internal combustion engine vehicle. So if you look at our pricing, it's exactly how an internal combustion engine vehicle is being priced, from the upfront cost to the monthly payment for battery leasing with the innovative battery leasing model that we are using. So the way that we're looking at it is we are out there to provide EVs to the mass market with our range from the A segment to E segment. We have everything for everybody. So that's our strategy. We're not out there to compete with the EV companies.
Your EV plant in North Carolina, you're also looking at production in Germany. What's the latest on that plan?
We get the plant in the US started first, but we have been looking at the Europe. I think Germany is one of them, but we are looking at a few other locations in Europe as well. So.
And of course, there are plans to IPO in the US. Is that on track? And how are you assessing the lackluster environment in the equity market?
Yeah, we already announced that we would like to do the IPO in the US, which is the most difficult market in the world. I mean, the market condition has been challenging, so we're watching to see, how. We're looking for opportunity to go, but we're still waiting.
As always, a pleasure having you with us. Leti Tutui, VinFast CEO, she's joining us here. We're coming to you live from the Qatar Economic Forum. Tom, it is hard to concentrate with all what's happening around us.
As ever, you are the total pro. You've done brilliantly. That was an interesting interview there on the ground at the Qatar Economic Forum. We do, of course, apologise for the audio issues there. Of course, it's very busy and very loud at a very well-attended forum. OK, coming up, we speak to former Barclays CEO Bob Diamond on all things investing and the macro environment, again, from the Qatar Economic Forum. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.